Welcome to Futuristic Tech Trends. Please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon for notifications.
So now we can describe um, a bit of theoretical explanation about Android intents that we have already seen in the example before. So the intents are actually how we define them. Uh, this intent is an object which is used to call a certain part of the code from some other component of our same app or the same project. For example, we call some other activity from one activity, or we call a broadcast receiver, or we start, for example, certain service that we have defined in some other part of the project, in the same project, or we bind some service to it. Okay, so this is what intent is used for, just to call some other part of the code in some other place, from some other place, which is not connected to each other. It's a kind of, it connects one part to the other. So what why, for what reason are the intent are used? The intents are used to call the activities. We use an intent from to call one activity from the start activity. We call the destination activity, or they are used to call to connect to the broadcast receivers. Or intents are used to call the start services. For example, we create an intent of the service, and we then use the function start service and pass intent as an argument, or bind services. So it's like a message that we are passing from one part of the code to another. For example, the message is passed from the activity to other activity, or to the broadcast receiver, or to start services, or bind, or to for content providers are also are also some part of the code that are used with the intents. Content providers, we can also call content providers with the intents providers. So as we did in our example, to call the activities, we use the start activity function. After creating the intent of that particular activity, and give the arguments, from the source and the destination, we pass the intent object to the start activity function. In the case of start service, for example, we define an intent for our service. Service is actually done similar to the activity. What is the difference between service and activity? Service is actually a process that is running in the background. It doesn't have a UI like that, like we have for an activity. So and we start the service by using start service. And just like the start activity, after we have created the service, and we pass again the intent as an argument inside the service, and we pass the data using the intent as well to the service. And we can also, for example, use the bind service method and pass this method the intent and some other arguments, to kind of come, so that our service can communicate with the uh, so that we can communicate with the service. So and uh, now we see what are the types of intents. There are actually two types of intents. One is the explicit intent, and the second is the implicit intent, as you can see here. This is the explicit intent, and this is the implicit intent. Two types of intents. So what is the difference between explicit and implicit? Explicit intent means that you know the name of the component that you want to call, or the activity or service or whatever, and it exists in the same app that you are programming, so you call from your one component the other component using the explicit intent. But implicit intents mean that you don't know, it is unknown. The component that you want to call is unknown, it is in some other app, for example, located. And for example, in the case of the user wants to uh, if he wants to uh, find some location, and he clicks some button on your app, so you in your through your app, you just specify it through this implicit intent what action needs to be performed. And depending on this implicit intent and the action that you need to be used, you define that needs to perform, your app calls some other app, for example, suitable app which can give you this map or this location information that the user is requesting for. So that's the difference between the implicit and the explicit intents, and this is very important to know about these two kind of intents. There is another important kind of intent class that we use, which is called a pending intent class. Pending intent is used, for example, uh, this pending intent class, if you want to, for example, call if you want to, for example, give permission. Sorry, it should be intent, not intend. So pending intent is going to give a permission to your application to no, it's actually not your application, but it's going to give the permission to a foreign application to kind of perform action depending on that intent, uh, as if this foreign application is performing the task using your app, which is like your app is performing the task. Like, I described a bit further that in what cases, then you understand better in what cases we can use a pending intent. For example, the Android notification manager, it's like an external application. It fires or it performs an action depending on the intent that you declared in your application. So this is called a pending intent being executed by, for example, a notification manager, because your application received a notification and then some intent gets fired. Another example is, for example, our alarm manager. So alarm manager is actually performing an intent at a certain time, that we set, or it's going to perform a certain task, or it's going to ring a bell or something. We declare the intent and it's going to perform that. So this alarm manager. So this is where we use pending intent for, for example, what kind of intent this alarm manager can perform. It can call a service, or for example a ring service or something, and that can then start ringing, or maybe it can, at this particular time, it can maybe do a certain other task. For example, it can reboot your system or something, it can call a service which reboots your system, so in this way we can use the pending intent.
That was awesome, thank you.
Please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon for notifications.